The state of negotiations between Iran and the United States can be described as going from the frying pan into the fire. And as of today, it's almost impossible to predict what will happen. But there are certain patterns, of course, that can help us track where things are heading. Let's try to go over all the possible scenarios today. We're not considering the scenario where the United States of America drops an atomic bomb on Iran. So there was Iran, there was a problem. No Iran, no problem. So we won't consider that, but I promise to consider everything else. Or as my Georgian relatives say, I swear. Meanwhile, while the world is holding its breath watching the whole absurd spectacle, just a few blocks from the White House, investigators are sealing boxes of gold bars, and boxes of gold bars, which, according to the prosecution, a former senior CIA officer had been taking out for years from the most secure building in America. Can you believe that? You may think these are separate stories, but look closely with me and you'll see just one. Today we're breaking down the US-Iran deal, in which, as we're told, almost everything has already been decided. Well, almost everything is settled, just a few minor details remain. But from my point of view, the minor details they're talking about are actually the most important things. But maybe I'm wrong. And accordingly, we'll talk about the quiet scandal inside the CIA, which explains why the words of the government, the leadership, the oath, and the care for citizens. There, in modern America, you have to say them with the same caution as in Russia, Vietnam, Ukraine, Mozambique, Congo, and other places. We have already discussed more than once that it's important for Americans to end the war, or at least to stop it, which, of course, is not the same thing. Around the last days of May, or at most the last week of June or the first week of July. I've explained many times why this is important, but I'll repeat the main point. It has a direct connection to the elections in November. So it looks like we're moving in this direction. Yes, Harris, we are closer.
Yes, Harris, we are closer. And the Situation Room figures into this too. Most likely because at 11 o'clock, as we were told, he was supposed to receive the daily presidential briefing, the intelligence summary, and usually we are not told exactly where this happens. But in the Situation Room, he can communicate through secure channels with people he can't reach from the Oval Office, or at least it's easier to do it from the Situation Room. And since he said he's going down there, we'll know when he's underground by the appearance of a Marine at the post by the West Wing. For now, he's not there. But there's something else important in this Truth Social post. 2 days ago at the cabinet meeting, we heard him say that he wouldn't be satisfied if China or Russia entered Iran to take the enriched uranium, what he calls nuclear dust. Now he claims that the US and China are actually the only countries capable of doing this. But according to him, it will be the United States that will remove it in close coordination with the Islamic Republic of Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency.
What can we understand from this? The first thing is that an agreement has been reached with the Iranians that the enriched uranium will be removed from the country. Trump quickly pushed Russia, as they say, into the background and stated that there are only 2 countries that have the technological capabilities to do this. Well, of course, that's complete nonsense. I can name at least 3 or 4 more countries for you, just off the top of my head. But anyway, these 2 countries turned out to be the USA and China. In reality, the Chinese, who previously said that they didn't want to get involved there at all, later said, "We'll deal with Iran ourselves," and then something else. And now I think after reaching some kind of agreement with the Americans, so we're saying that through the joint efforts of the US, China, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, they mean, I think, monitoring nuclear developments, all of this will be collected, removed, and taken away. But where to? Well, they don't say. It's unknown. But actually, it's not that important. I'm sure now we'll hear voices saying, what if it goes to Russia? What if it goes to China? And so on. So I have a question for you, ladies and gentlemen. Why don't the Chinese give their enriched uranium to Iran? They have plenty of it. Well, they'll export another 400 kilograms to China. So after that, will they just start giving it to Iran? Come on, that's nonsense. The thing is, China absolutely doesn't want some idiot to blow up something nuclear anywhere on the planet either.
These are details we didn't have before. And they give the impression that this part has already been agreed upon. This is very important. After all, until now, we were only talking about extending the ceasefire for 60 days, after which they could start discussing the details of the nuclear program. It sounds like there were calls to some Iranian leaders and to the IAEA about who exactly will be involved in this. We just don't know when and where.
The Fox host, who, by the way, is the president's daughter-in-law, asked him directly, "Are you really ready to start bombing Iran again?" Here, listen to Donald J. Trump.
Will they cross the line so that you go back on the offensive again?
Well, a deal that would be bad for us is a deal breaker. Because, I weigh the options. We'll see. That's what I do. I negotiate. They negotiate. They're very good negotiators. They're cunning.
At the same time as we're having tough negotiations, both sides are going after each other using every means they have right now.
They are also committing a blatant violation of the ceasefire, according to Central Command, which accuses the Iranians of launching a ballistic missile toward Kuwait, as well as 5 attack drones in the Strait of Hormuz area. American officials think Iran's elected leaders, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the ruling clergy are struggling to agree with each other during these negotiations with the U.S. It's unclear which key groups back the agreement giving President Trump what he wants. However, we do know exactly what he wants, based on Scott Bessant's latest on-camera statement yesterday.
The president has made his 3 demands very clear: open the strait, stop uranium enrichment, and abandon the nuclear program. If the deal is impossible without these conditions, then why make a deal without them?
First, the facts. According to sources in the American administration, the U.S. and Iranian delegations have reached a preliminary agreement. The document in question is a Memorandum of Understanding. It's not a treaty, but it's like the Budapest Memorandum. So you give Russia all your nuclear stuff, well, all kinds of nuclear weapons, missiles, and so on and so on. And in return, the US, the UK, and Russia, if someone attacks you, even if it's one of them, yes, they will immediately go straight to the UN and report it. Yes, that's basically the essence. I just summarized the essence of the memorandum in my own words. I strongly suspect that this memorandum has about the same significance and weight. It has 3 cornerstones, so the first one is Hormuz, of course. Iran agrees to free passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, any threat of closure, and Tehran has been using this threat for the last quarter of a century. Well, as a kind of switch, so to speak, it immediately raises global fuel prices. It increases tanker insurance costs, hits the logistics of Japan, Germany, everyone. If Iran really guarantees passage, what does that mean? I don't understand. Well, they've guaranteed it now, but tomorrow, as they say, it's my pot, wherever I want. I put it wherever I want, right? It's my word. If I want, I take it back. That's how I see it. Maybe I'm wrong, that's all. If they really guarantee passage and the world believes it, then it means the oil market gets something it hasn't had since the Iranian Revolution. Confidence, right? Although I think for the Persians to just take back all their words and then say they never said them, that nothing was there, that nothing was left there, it's only half a step either way. Second point, nuclear negotiations, not a nuclear deal, ladies and gentlemen. Negotiations about a deal, so let's not quit smoking. Let's talk about how we're going to quit smoking. Let's do that. You see, the difference is quite significant. On paper, Iran agrees to come to the table, but on paper it also keeps everything it has in its underground facilities. In Fordo, as it's called, and in Natanz. That is, in exchange for a political gesture, Iran gets time. They believe that this is the most valuable resource for their country because the centrifuges are already spinning. Third point, money. According to the Iranian side, the memorandum includes the unfreezing of half of the blocked assets. About $12 billion in total. Well, half of that, so take a calculator and you can figure out how much that half is. This money is held in accounts in South Korea, Japan, and Qatar. Partially in Europe as well, since the era of sanctions from Obama's team. $12 billion is not aid, ladies and gentlemen, it's Iranian money. Tehran did not have access to this money. That is, they sold oil, earned this money, but then we seized it. We or someone else did. Well, yes, Obama probably, who knows? I don't remember now. And they stopped it. And no one, fearing us, gave this money back to Iran. But in a political sense, this is a thaw, which the Iranian side has already started spinning at home, that is, in Iran, as a victory. And now the most important thing, Trump hasn't signed anything yet. Read it again. So, there is a document. The delegations have agreed. The Iranian side has already started promoting the result, and the President of the United States says, "We need to think about it." This is not a bureaucratic delay, ladies and gentlemen. He's not playing golf at this time and then coming to sign. No, this is a pause, a deliberate one. And the whole rest of the story is contained in this pause. Why the pause? Because Iran attached one condition to the deal, which I think the White House is having a harder time dealing with today than even the nuclear issue. Tehran says, "We will only sign when the war in Lebanon is over." That is, when Israel stops bombing and conducting operations against Hezbollah. And Israel at this very moment. Well, it's like looking into a well. They're expanding the operation. Let me slowly untangle this knot, because from here, basically, all the other threads stretch out. Netanyahu handed over to the Israel Defense Forces. He gave the order to establish control over, listen here, 70% of the Gaza Strip. Why 70? Why not 60 or 92? Why not capture everything at all? This is a new stage, and this is a publicly announced objective. It's not a leak. Meanwhile, strikes in southern Lebanon and Beirut are increasing. Today, literally today, military representatives of Israel and Lebanon are meeting in Washington. And I ask you to pay attention, not diplomats. Not ministers, military officials. What does that mean? It means we're not talking about making peace. Why should we make peace with Lebanon? So, guys, how can we make sure that when we strike Hezbollah, we don't accidentally hit you, not accidentally shoot at each other? I think that's the main topic of the conversation. The line between escalation and de-escalation in such a meeting comes down to a single phone call. And this is where the mechanics of the whole deal become clear. Iran is not directly bargaining over its nuclear program. That's already clear. Well, in the end, they'll give it up. What else can they do? I mean, they'll quietly keep refining something there, but they'll hand over what's been purified. Iran is bargaining over Lebanon. So Iran is using Hezbollah as a living collateral, if you understand what I mean. As long as Hezbollah is under attack, Iran won't sign the deal. If they sign the deal, they'll lose their trump card. If they don't sign, they'll lose. They lose 12 billion TTC. So it's either Hezbollah or 12 billion. Either Hezbollah or 12 billion, which we desperately need right now, because the domestic economy is falling apart. And I won't pretend the cracks aren't there. Inflation in Tehran is over 60%. Guys, 60%. I lived in Israel when it was 70, and also when it was 130. But it was only 70. You'd just go somewhere, say to work. Yeah, and you'd see a suit or something. It was displayed at one price. And when you came back in the evening, it already had a different price. They had to display it. They were in tonaliers, they were shekels, they were liras. They had to display it in Lebanese dollars. They couldn't use dollars. Even conventional units didn't work in Israel. You'd go back and forth. Different prices. It would go up during the day, every day. By the way, bazaar in Iran is not a metaphor. Yes, it's a political force, because everything happens at the bazaar. Exchange, conversations, discontent. And this political force, the bazaar, puts pressure on the authorities. What does Trump do? Trump keeps the document unsigned, because signing it right now would tie Israel's hands. Not signing lets Iran walk away gracefully, saying, "See, Americans are unpredictable again. There's no point negotiating with them." This is their classic position, where losing and winning differ by just one step. And that step is Netanyahu. So the longer Trump discusses and thinks, the longer Trump hesitates, the more opportunities Netanyahu has to hit whoever he's planning to hit. That's why Netanyahu is now, as they say, holding his own card to play. He has an internal political need to show results in Gaza. An internal political need. It's not as important for the world as the American one, but for Israel and for the region, it's seriously important. So, of course, he has a personal agreement with Trump, which neither of them publicly confirms, but which can be traced, well, by the behavior of both of them, let's say, since January. Netanyahu has an interesting factor, what I just mentioned. 70%, right? That's not a round number. It's a mathematically chosen threshold, after which Hamas loses logistical connectivity, if it's clear that the connection is through Gaza. So, when you take control of 70%, they've calculated exactly which 70% of Gaza's territory must be brought under control. Then Hamas can no longer operate. Well, as separate small gangs, but together they can no longer operate. The Israeli cabinet believes that less is not enough. Well, not less, otherwise everything will have to be repeated in 2 years. Let's add it up. Iran wants money in Hormuz without Lebanon. Well, so that certain changes don't happen in Lebanon. Israel wants Gaza and Lebanon without Iran. Trump wants everything at once. And he understands that it's impossible to get everything at once. He really doesn't want the solution that, judging by the leaks, the White House is leaning toward. Although with Trump, he might decide one thing today and then choose a completely different path tomorrow. But there is a consistent step-by-step solution. First, a quiet de-escalation in Lebanon, maybe through today's military meeting in Washington, where they can quietly reach an agreement without the world hearing what they're negotiating about. Like, let's freeze things for 6 months and then we'll do something together later. Then the signing of the Hormuz Agreement, then 60 days of negotiations on the nuclear program, which we will, of course, drag out until the end of October or the beginning of November. Israel finishes its Gaza operation under Washington's political cover. Why are you interfering? You didn't ask for this? This is the optimistic scenario. The pessimistic scenario is that one link, any of them, breaks and the whole structure collapses. What does history show? We should examine and discuss it to understand what happened. History shows that Iran knows how to come to the table looking polished and back out at the last moment. Vienna 2021, Geneva 2015. Paris, I think it was 2 years earlier. Everywhere at the last moment, conditions would appear that it's like it wasn't there, but they say, what do you mean it wasn't? Not that we ignored it. We discussed and considered it often, but just hadn't written it down yet. It wasn't present at first. It's not malice, stupidity, or forgetfulness. It's a strategy, right? You know, like when a turtle is swimming down a stream and a snake says, "Hey, turtle, carry me to the other side." Well, you know the joke, of course. And the turtle says, "But you'll bite me and we'll both drown." The snake replies, "Why would I do that? I know if I bite you." The turtle thinks, that's true. So the turtle swims up, the snake climbs on, they're sitting in the middle of the stream, and the snake bites the turtle. And then she starts to drown and says, "What have you done? How could you? Now we're both going to drown. And the snake says to her, "I'm a snake, a snake." It's pretty much the same situation we have with Tehran. I'm a snake, a snake. Tehran is bargaining like at an Eastern bazaar. The closer it gets to closing time, the higher the price. And Trump, to his credit, understands this. He himself bargains by the same principle, and that's why the signing is still up in the air, like that very last move players usually make in deep silence a minute before the clock strikes. Do you want to know what signs to watch for in the next 72 hours? Yes, 72 hours, I think even less. I'm recording right now, you'll be watching a bit later. I think that in the next, let's say, 60 hours first. The result of today's military meeting involving Lebanon, Israel, and Washington. If there is a joint communique, even a short one, it's a signal that the de-escalation corridor is open. If the meeting ends without a communique, like the military met and then parted ways, nothing to say, then it means the deal with Iran is postponed, well, for at least a week. So it means something still needs to be finished, someone needs to be dealt with, something needs to be completed there, yes, to finish shooting. Second, the behavior of Tehran inside the country. If Iranian state media are, let's say, preparing public opinion for a historic victory, it means the signing is near, or it exists but hasn't been announced yet. If, on the contrary, they start heating up the topic of American traitors, saying that they always do this, it means Tehran is backing down, and someone in the White House has already realized that the signing won't happen, or Trump said there won't be a signing. Third, the oil market. Prices react to expectations, not to news. If oil starts going down over the weekend, the market is betting on Hormuz. If it stabilizes or goes up, the market is no longer betting on Hormuz. And fourth, this is also an interesting thing, so Netanyahu's personal schedule, any unscheduled trip to Washington, any late-night call, any cancellation of internal meetings, all of this will mean that the American-Israeli part of the structure is now being reworked. Something needs to be reconsidered. And fifth, well, let's say what Trump himself says publicly. In this situation, the president often says the opposite out loud to what he signs behind closed doors. If he starts loudly criticizing Iran, it means the signing is close. If he starts praising, it means something didn't go according to plan. I know it sounds absurd, but that's just how things are cooked up, ladies and gentlemen. You get the idea, right? A deal that's making headlines all over the world isn't really a deal yet. This is a map where Hormuz, Lebanon, Gaza, and 12 billion are all drawn in one rectangle, and someone has to decide how to divide up that rectangle. Because it has to be divided. Everyone has scissors in their hands, but only one of them can sign everything right now, or replace everything. And still, it's good that he's here with us, on our side in the White House. Before we move on to the second story, let me answer two questions that are most often asked in this situation. The first one, how will the world react to each of the scenarios currently facing Trump? And the second one is how any of these decisions will affect the November elections, which are just a little over 5 months away for the Republican Party. Well, let's start with the world. Scenario uno, the first one. Trump signs the deal as is. That means Israel publicly winds down the operation in Lebanon in exchange for Iran's signature on the Hormuz Agreement and an additional $12 billion. Riyadh quietly greets it with applause. For the Saudis, the main thing is to close the Hezbollah issue and the Houthis issue in Yemen. Keeping the Strait of Hormuz open is export insurance for them. The reaction of the Arab monarchs of the Persian Gulf is similar. Moscow smiles in public but is angry behind the scenes. It benefits the Kremlin for Tehran to keep its trump card, because the more the West is distracted in the Middle East, the less pressure there is, let's say less support for Ukraine. Beijing celebrates publicly. The Chinese have been betting on de-escalation all last week. About 70% of their imported Iranian oil goes through the Hormuz Strait. Brussels breathes a sigh of relief. For Europe, this means a drop in gas prices. Well, there is a chain. Oil and gas are connected, and it eases concerns about Mediterranean routes. Ankara is trying to get involved in the process. Well, as a mediator, anyone could do it. We could even send boats right now with that, what's her name, that crazy girl. There you go. Erdogan will make a statement about Turkey's role within a day. I'm sure of it. Jerusalem is publicly restrained. There's internal division. The right wing of the coalition says, traitors, centrists, and a historic victory. That's it. Scenario 2. Sequential. Here is the quiet coalition of Lebanon, then Hormuz, then nuclear negotiations. This is a scenario where no one celebrates, but no one openly loses either. Riyadh and the Gulf are calm. Moscow is coolly neutral. For the Kremlin, this is the worst option, because taking away this leverage makes us mediators too. Beijing waits patiently. The Chinese are used to working with step-by-step processes. Brussels supports cautiously, speaking without enthusiasm. Jerusalem breathes a sigh of relief. This scenario gives Netanyahu time to finish off Gaza under political cover. Iran is internally nervous. The Iranian authorities don't like deals where the reward is delayed, but they go along with it. Scenario 3. Trump refuses to sign at all. But this is a scenario of failure, right? El Riyadh is publicly restrained. Behind the scenes, they're dissatisfied. The Saudis don't have much time to spare. Moscow is celebrating openly. For the Kremlin, this is the ideal outcome. Beijing is somewhat irritated but remains silent. China is now aiming for a deeper bilateral agreement with Tehran, bypassing Washington directly. So what had started to improve will quietly fade away. Brussels is concerned about oil prices and is hedging its gas contracts. Jerusalem is partly celebrating, partly afraid. A victory in Lebanon without Iranian restraint means that in 2 years the same thing will happen again. Well, in 4 years, Iran is mobilizing. The first 2 days after the breakdown are the most dangerous because Tehran has to show that it hasn't given in, that it's strong, that it's like Tarzan. Hormuz. Let's put it this way, let's stop here. Scenario 4, the last partial signing. Only Hormuz, without the $12 billion, without the Lebanese condition. So that's how they agreed, right? This scenario is discussed the least behind the scenes, but it might actually be the most realistic. El Riyadh is satisfied. Moscow is irritated. Beijing is okay. Brussels is grateful. Jerusalem is calm. Iran is dissatisfied. But not enough to derail the process. The Iranian authorities are ready to trade the form for the substance of the formula if the $12 billion comes later through a separate track. That's regarding peace. Now let's talk about the elections in November. With just over 5 months until the elections, the Republican Party needs 2 outcomes, one in foreign policy and one economic. The Iran deal can deliver both at once or fail both at once. If Trump signs a successful version, either the first or the fourth, the Republicans will get a gift they haven't had since 2020. In terms of foreign policy, Trump closed the Iran issue that previous administrations couldn't resolve for 16 years. Hooray for Trump. Hooray for the Republicans. Now the economic track. An open Strait of Hormuz means a drop in oil prices. That means in a month, month and a half, or 2, gasoline prices at American gas stations will go down. And the price of gasoline is the number that the average American voter sees every day. And they directly associate it with whoever is in the White House. If oil is cheap, that's a good president. Like, well, gas was cheap. If gas prices go up, that's a bad president. A drop in the price by $1 per gallon between June and October is absolutely realistic and can boost the overall vote by about 2 to 2.5 points. That's a huge deal. In an average swing state, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Nevada, that's the difference between losing and winning. Well, in a few key counties. If Trump follows the second scenario consistently and methodically, Republicans get a moderate but steady advantage. This is a scenario where victory is presented as a package closer to September or October, right when voters start making their decisions. If Trump refuses to sign at all, in the third scenario, Republicans take a heavy blow. The price of oil goes up. Gasoline prices follow. Blaming the predecessor for this, as was done in 2020 and 2022, is already technically impossible. On the foreign policy track, Trump gets exactly the same label directed at him that he used against his opponents for 18 months. He bargained and didn't follow through. The Democrats are getting a gift. Expensive fuel, a canceled deal, regional instability. You understand the position the president is in right now, right? Decisions that seem purely about foreign policy are actually domestic. And that's the main point. That's really the main thing. No matter what the rest of the world thinks. Trump's signing or withdrawal on Iran isn't just about Hormuz, $12 billion. It's 2 percentage points on average across the country, and 5 to 7 in several districts that will decide in November whether the Republican majority will remain in the House of Representatives. That's exactly what will decide whether the Republican majority will remain in the House of Representatives. And all the fuss around the world right now is exactly about this. And now I invite you to move from the world of big conference tables to the world of closed doors, corridors, and dimmed lights. Because the second story of today is not about press conferences, but about little boxes. And about what, according to the prosecution, was inside those boxes. David Rash, a former senior CIA officer, not a movie operative, not a legend, but a career employee who worked in the agency for many years, a man through whose hands the agency's assets passed, Well, in our terms, a manager, right? Today, he is accused of embezzlement and of giving false testimony to federal investigators. According to the investigation, the amount embezzled is gold bars worth tens of millions of dollars. First, a few technical clarifications, because in this story, every detail screams. Gold in the CIA is not a museum piece, it's a working tool. For decades, the agency has used gold as a universal currency in operations where the dollar doesn't work, where there is no banking system, where the other party won't accept American bills, and where you need to pay a source in a way that leaves no electronic trace. The bars are kept in secure vaults inside the agency. They are tracked by a separate system, and access to them is very restricted and limited to a very small group of people. And according to the prosecution, David Rush was part of this group and used his access not for operational purposes, but for personal ones. That is, for himself. And not just yesterday or the day before, but for years. Why does the prosecution insist on for years? Because it's technically impossible to take out bullion worth $20 million all at once. It's technically possible, but impossible. That means taking out small amounts over and over again, and taking out small amounts means that for some reason the accounting system didn't record these small withdrawals. I mean, maybe it did notice, but it kept quiet. And this is where the most important part of this story begins. Not Rush, but the system. One officer, even a senior one, can't bypass the inventory procedure 20 times on his own. This means that the annual inventory procedure in this part of the agency was flawed. Either Rush had colleagues who were involved in this, knowing about it and not reporting it. There is simply no third explanation in this story, and now about the false testimony. Rush is accused not only of theft, but also of lying to investigators. So this is formally a separate charge, but lawyers know that if a person is capable of falsifying their own books for years and then sitting across from an FBI agent and lying with a straight face, what are the chances that the polygraph worked there, right? This is either a professionally trained liar or a person who is absolutely sure that the system won't catch him. And in this case, the training is job-related. So, after some practice, he came in. What does this story say about the CIA? It's not that the agency is rotten. That's too broad of a statement. It says that when you're inside an organization that by definition has no external audit, well, there's no external audit there. You can't just bring in accountants to check things. You get it, right? They'll come out wide-eyed. Do you know who we've bribed? In intelligence, there can't be, in the full sense of the word, any external audit. So internal control becomes the only protection against embezzlement. There are people working there too. There are intelligence officers. Yes, intelligence officers are people too. They come home, so to speak. They need to pee, they want to eat, they want to have fun. And they see something golden shining and they want to bring it home. If internal control can be bypassed by one person for years, it means there was actually no control. And no one except the organization itself would have found out about it. By the way, it's interesting that it was Rash, yes, who was exposed by another investigator from the agency. Everything was done by the book and was fine. It was his own ordinary carelessness, an excessive lifestyle, as they wrote. Expensive real estate. It's unclear, so to speak, how he could afford to buy that with his declared income. He was moving money around, transferring it back and forth, which didn't match his salary at all, right? So it wasn't an audit that exposed him, but a routine tax inspection. They turned on some computer or AI and it flagged, "Guys, something's not right here." The intelligence officer who had been smuggling gold out of the CIA for years wasn't stopped by the CIA like, "Hey guys, where did our 20 million in gold go?" But it was the tax office, just the city tax inspectorate or something like that, right? They pressed a button, something caught someone's attention, and then it all started rolling. This is the point where the two stories we're talking about today intersect. In the first story, the Iranian one, Trump is trying to publicly resolve an issue where the parties are bargaining over assets that are invisible to us. Nuclear centrifuges, frozen accounts, tunnels, Hezbollah. In the second CIA story, it becomes clear that within the American state there is a zone of invisibility where not only the intelligence process becomes invisible, but also the physical metal in the vault. Look, I'm saying I want you to understand that I mean what I'm saying right now. I'm not talking about the fact that something was stolen. Things get stolen all the time, everywhere, right? I'm not talking about whether a good or bad person got caught. I'm not talking about whether their audit is bad or anything like that, right? I'm talking about the fact that they have a whole layer where assets are thrown in. Gold, money, and other things. And no one knows what happens to them because you can't check. You can't check. Well, you can't check anymore, but you can't check your own people. That's it, and that's all there is to it. Angels work there, it's nothing. And if it's not angels working, then half of it is useless. Well, like Russia, yeah, like Ukraine. It's the same thing, half, a third, a quarter, however much you want. But half of it just vanishes. They caught one. They caught one. With 20 or 30, I don't know how many, I don't remember, millions of dollars worth of gold. And in both cases, the question is the same. How do we as citizens know that everything inside the institutions works the way they tell us it does? Or should we just assume from the start that they're lying to us all the time, non-stop? I'm not going to spin some grand theory from this today. I'm just noting that on one table there are billions in embezzlement, on another millions in theft. And between these tables are institutions whose internal doors are locked tighter than the external ones, and no one is allowed in. In other words, dear compatriots, we're being fooled. And it seems like everyone who can is trying their hardest to fool us, and for the most part, they don't mind fooling us at all. There are some signs of good things, but so far they're only glimpses at the end of a long tunnel. Despite everything, both stories are still at a stage where they can be changed. The Iran deal hasn't been signed yet. That means Washington still has room to make it better, not worse. The Rash case is still open. That means the American justice system has a chance to show that from Langley to the federal court, there is still a path, a trail, and it's shorter than it seemed before. And you, watching this in real time, are witnessing a rare moment when major institutions are forced to bring things to light, to bring out certain things, when the barriers they've put between us and them are becoming more and more transparent. And now, a few words in conclusion. I promised no big theories today, but at the very end, allow me to share one brief thought from the philosophers I return to most often. Just half a second. The state to which we entrust more and more problems to solve for us, well, kind of like artificial intelligence, right? Stops being our servant, our servant, our servant. First, it becomes an agent, meaning someone who carries out orders but in its own way, and then an administrator who makes decisions for us. This path was described by Vladev at the beginning of the 20th century as inevitable for a society that hands its will over to someone else. In this scheme, if you remove people, everything will be logical. Without people, the state is the servant, the taxpayer is the master, there's a contract between them, a beautiful model. The problem is that we are not angels, but people, humans, Homo sapiens. Well, more homo than sapiens, but still. And every person, when faced with the opportunity to take something that's just lying around, goes through the same test. And it's not a philosophical test, but a biological one. In this sense, Iran is no different from the United States. It's just that in Tehran, they use religious orthodoxy to hold on to power, while in Washington, they use brainwashing ideology. And the theft at the CIA follows the same logic as an Iranian official arranging an oil tanker through a shell company. And it's the same as an American congressman buying stocks a day before a committee decision. In 1991, I started a company in Moscow. I left for 2 or 3 months and came back. There were some odd things. It turned out that the head of the computer department, who was acting as my manager while I was away, plus the person I specifically hired to check everything, were involved. They sat down and made a deal among the three of them. It wasn't because they didn't like me. On the contrary, they treated me very well and were very grateful to me. It's just that there was something they wanted, and to take it, all three of them had to agree. So they sat down and made an agreement. Back in the 90s, my relatives and friends in Moscow would tell me over tea how they deceived other relatives and friends, and when I looked at them in shock and surprise, they would add, "Well, you've changed in that scary America. Man is a wolf to man, but here we have culture, civility, and gentleness." The word screppy didn't exist yet. I mean, not that word. The word screppy, right? That's the word. It didn't exist yet, but the meaning was the same. Telling me how cruel, unfair, and ungrateful America is, like it's some kind of jungle. A jungle, what do they call it? Steel or iron jungle, I don't know. Explaining to me how ugly capitalism was, they were stealing from people they'd lived with all their lives. By one simple logic, if I can steal and didn't, then I'm a fool. And now about optimism. Everything I've talked about today, the Iran deal, gold from the CIA, 3 parties making agreements behind the back of the 4th, all rely on one concept: political democracy. In it, the majority hasn't stolen, but if I steal, I'm a fool. The majority has the right to take everything it wants from the minority. Well, in my company it was different, but they decided that they would still hold a vote. We voted. We really want what he has, so now we'll get together, vote, set it up. He gets one, so we'll steal. The people chosen democratically are not controlled by anyone. They, like in the CIA, set up their own little insiders club. No one is allowed to come in and check on them. The overseers themselves, if there even are any, want to get in on it too. So right away this creates, so you give the money there, taxpayers, or you're the owners of the company, and inside we quickly take the door and you negotiate how we're going to split it up. The 2-party system doesn't help either because the 2 parties easily make deals with each other. It's not just the parties, it's people, certain individuals, and there are more of them than we realize or discuss. Like us and 3 employees in Moscow in '92. If you change one word in this concept, replace the word political with market, you get market democracy. In it, everyone votes not once every 2 years with a ballot, but every day with their dollar. In it, there's simply no one to steal from. I mean, there's no common fund. That means everything that exists is protected by property rights, and the owner protects it himself, either by hiring someone or by defending his property himself. And David Rash doesn't get to the box of gold because there's no state-owned box, and the private one is often guarded by a strong person.
300 там.
A 300-pound gorilla with a club. How do you move to this system without destroying the old one? That means you have to do it like this. You have to build a parallel one. The idea of tearing the old world down to the ground and so on, it doesn't work. Every time you destroy something, something happens that's even worse than before, right? And here you don't need to destroy anything. You just build a parallel system alongside what they have, one that competes and eventually wins. That's what we're discussing on the Roadmap to Freedom channel, right? 200 short conversations of 10 minutes each, or the same content reworked into 17 one-hour discussions or conversations. It's the same material, just organized differently. These aren't lectures, they're heartfelt conversations about the world we want and how to achieve it. There will be a link to my book in the description, which you can get for free. If you subscribe every morning, you'll receive a 10-minute interesting and unusual video conversation on all the topics I talked about today. By the way, there will also be a link to another book, but that's not about political conversations. It's my stories, published many times in periodicals in a bunch of languages, but for the first time collected in Russian and together in one book. The stories from my life are mostly amusing and funny. And this is a real book, printed on paper, and I'll sign every copy for anyone who buys one. There are only about 100 copies left. That's it for today, dear friends, and see you soon.